morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where before we get started, I just want to give you a friendly reminder that you have until the end of the day this coming Sunday to tweet me your entry for the chance to win one of 3 Blu-ray copies of the movie San Andreas from our friends at Dolby Atmos, who not only did the sound mix for the theatrical release, but also the Blu-ray release. So again, here are the rules. By the end of the day Sunday, you have to tweet me at Grace Randolph why you would want The Rock to save you during an earthquake. However, I'm not going to make it that easy for you because you have to also include the hashtags Dolby Atmos and hashtag San Andreas. And some of you have said, I'm taking out too many characters, but that's part of the challenge. And I have to say, some of the entries so far are absolutely spectacular. So the bar is raised very high in this competition, but good luck to everyone. And I'll announce the 3 winning tweets on Monday's episode of Morning Movie News, and then I'll be contacting you on how to get your, how you'll receive your free copy of San Andreas, which, as you might recall from my review, was actually a really good movie. I thought it was one of the better movies of the summer, and certainly one of The Rock's best movies. All right, so let's get into today's movie news. We have 3 stories, and then, of course, the viewer question. Now, the first one is actually a confirmation of a rumor we discussed just a few days ago, and that's that the Hulk will be showing up in Thor 3 Ragnarok. That has been confirmed by one of the industry trades, and we'll get into that in just a moment, and then we'll also touch on a few other rumors swirling around Thor Ragnarok, just to get a little bit of a better picture of how that film is coming together, or how at least Marvel hopes it comes together, because I think that's definitely their most problematic trilogy right now, because they fixed Captain America. Iron Man's over, but I think Iron Man was pretty strong throughout. Despite some people's complaints about 2 and 3, the films certainly all performed. But Thor has had genuine problems, and I think those problems might rear their ugly head with the 3rd entry, because people are like, I already sat through 2 of these, I don't know if I can do a 3rd. And they're like, well, do you want to see the Hulk? And they're like, okay, I'll go see your movie. I think that's Marvel's plan. But anyway, let's start out with this confirmation. It came out of Deadline yesterday, and it was very interesting to see how the story was reported, because their top reporter actually, broke the confirmation, and he mused in the article, why don't they make a Hulk solo movie already at Marvel? And it was really interesting to see in the comments a number of people say, how do you, as the head of Deadline, not know that Mark Ruffalo just recently confirmed, or revealed, I guess, that Universal has the rights, still has the rights to any Hulk solo film. So if Disney Marvel wanted to make a Hulk solo film, they'd have to most likely distribute through Universal or cut some kind of deal. So it's just really interesting, I think, in 2 regards. One is that movie news today comes from really obscure sources sometimes. I mean, this Mark Ruffalo information came from the press rounds for Avengers Age of Ultron, where there was a lot of news flying around left and right. So I think it's hard for, even as you can see, the industry trade reporters, the top industry trade reporters, to stay on top of that. I really do feel there's no excuse for him not to have known this, but I think it's interesting. And so that's the first reason. And the second thing is, it's just how knowledgeable the readership is, that they can so quickly be like, how do you not know this? I know this. And I think this has actually always been the case with readership and news, and that's one of the things, we recently talked about the Truth trailer, the Dan Rather scandal with that story about George W. Bush going AWOL, not reporting for duty, and whether or not the documents they had were forged. And some people pointed out to me that was one of the first times, thanks to the internet, that the general public could call, BS on an official news story. So I think that the internet, of course, has allowed that kind of behavior to continue, and I think rightfully so, because if journalists get something wrong, I also think this is a 2-way street. I think you should also call them on it, but I love the fact that a lot of times you guys bring stories to my attention that I might have missed. For instance, today's 3rd story was brought to me by a BTT viewer who follows Bollywood and Indian cinema. They also got me, interested in the Bahubali film, and that ended up being a lot of fun discussing here on Beyond the Trailer. So I love the 2-way street that we have, but it is interesting indeed that Deadline did not know that very crucial bit of information. So anyway, let's talk about the rest of Thor Ragnarok, Thor 3. Well, there's also a rumor floating around, and so this might be confirmed to be true as well, that they're going to be adding Valkyrie to the mix. And she's kind of like the female version of Thor, but I guess that means they won't be having a female Thor, as, you know, some of us suspected, I think rightfully so, because of what's going on in the comics, and how that character is so popular with readers. But I think, as I've talked about, if you don't know who female Thor is at this point, that's on you. It's been out for a while. But that's, of course, Jane Foster. And I think Natalie Portman, you know, is not willing to sign on for any more movies, probably beyond Thor 3. And we'll even see if she shows up in Thor 3, because they're adding so many female characters. Because they're not only adding Valkyrie, but it stands to reason they'll add Enchantress as well. You know, kind of like the female Loki, I guess, to some degree, in the Thor universe, because Valkyrie is heavily tied to that character. And then, of course, you still have Sif in there. Poor Sif, you know, she's like, when is it going to be my turn? Well, you just put Valkyrie and Enchantress in front of me on the line for character development. And they're like, sorry, maybe you shouldn't have guested so much on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And also, you know, she has Blind Spot, I believe is the name of the show right now, where she's the lead. And I think that just makes her a little bit too much of a TV actress. And, you know, Thor has enough problems, right? So anyway, Thor is called Ragnarok, but everyone's saying it's going to be a cosmic road trip, and it's going to feature the Hulk. So I'm not quite sure how much this will, you know, stay in line with the, you know, the Ragnarok stories we've read in the pages of the comics. But it'll be interesting to see. The other thing about Thor Ragnarok is that it's said to be very dark. And the whole reason they actually hired comedic director Taika Waititi from What We Do in the Shadows, you know, the Flight of the Conchords, you know, director, is because they want to lighten things up, and they're like, oh, he'll make, you know, bring a little levity. And it's many fans have already pointed out with this rumor, well, if you want to go dark, then go dark. You know, stop hedging your bets, Marvel, and just make a dark movie already. I think that, you know, there wasn't a lot of levity in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and as I recall, all the Marvel fans went absolutely nuts for that movie. So we'll see. We'll see how Thor turns out. But these are interesting developments. The Hulk, it seems, will definitely be in the movie. All that's left is to settle Mark Ruffalo's deal. He's a pretty easygoing guy, though, so I can't imagine he wouldn't do it. Although, as I said when we first discussed this rumor, I think Vision would be a much better team-up with Thor, and I think that Hulk would be much better teaming up with Black Widow or Iron Man because, of course, science bros. But we'll see if this unlikely pairing ends up working. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is in honor of BTT viewer. See, this is the two-way street. Rod Hazarkani, who just could not believe that earlier this week I didn't cover the Bryan Cranston Marvel villain story, you know, and I'm going to put that in quotes because I don't think it's too much of a story. So I will cover it now, and I'll kind of shed some light as to why it wasn't a priority for me earlier in the week. So at New York Comic Con, Bryan Cranston was, you know, making the rounds, and he decided that he decided to make the announcement that he would love to play a Marvel villain. And of course, everybody pounced on this news. Now, I originally cast Bryan Cranston as an ideal Lex Luthor when they were first putting Batman v Superman together. They, of course, went with Jesse Eisenberg. But, I mean, that was the role that Bryan Cranston was born to play. And I don't really know if I have any interest in seeing him play another comic book villain. You know, maybe he'd make a really awesome Professor X, right, if Patrick Stewart doesn't want the gig anymore. But, you know, I just feel like he'd just become like Lex Luthor of a different name if he played a comic book villain for somebody else. But this story just wouldn't go away, and so I think Bryan Cranston, I think he made the comment just to get in the news, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, and also, let's not forget that Bryan Cranston has made some really crap movies. I think it's easy to focus just on Breaking Bad and his wonderful work there, and also, I'm not allowed to review it until November 2nd, but I just saw Trumbo recently, his movie where he stars as a blacklisted screenwriter, and during McCarthyism, and he's absolutely brilliant in it, and it's a fantastic movie. But let's not forget, like, Total Recall, the Total Recall remake, and some of the other films that he's done. I mean, he's not above a paycheck gig, unfortunately. And I also think that Bryan Cranston is one of those actors who's not brilliant in every single thing that he does. As I have to say, is the case with most actors. You know, I think, like, Tom Hardy is, like, one of the few exceptions to that, right? So I think that Bryan Cranston needs to be well cast. They often say that 90% of directing is casting, but I think a lot of the times a large percentage of acting is casting. Are you well cast in the role? So But what I mean by that comment is that don't assume that just because Bryan Cranston takes on a role that he's going to do a great job in it, right? So I think he just wanted to make headlines, and I think he was just baiting the press, particularly the Comic-Con centric press. So he was pressed on this further and further, though, so he finally picked Mr. Sinister. I think he just picked Mr. Sinister. I think he did a Google search, or he asked somebody to help him out, and that's just who they came up with, because he's a horrible Nathaniel Essex, right? I mean, we're talking about an old-time Victorian guy, and I think that Bryan Cranston is, I mean, look at the kind of roles he's taking right now. LBJ, Dalton Trumbo, he is a much gruffer, bigger individual. And I think for a Victorian person like Mr. Sinister, you want like a Jeremy Irons or something. Now, of course, he's Alfred. The pool thins or is getting pretty shallow when it comes to talent that's available for these movies. But it's not a great choice. I feel it's not a good match. And I think he just picked it to keep the stories going, and also because everybody was saying, what villain, what villain? So he just, he gave the crowd what they wanted. I just totally think this is a case of an actor playing the media for headlines, and he got them. Now, some people have pointed out that the Gambit movie is coming together, and of course Gambit has a history with Mr. Sinister, so it'll be interesting to see if Sinister shows up in that movie, whether he's played by Bryan Cranston or not. He's a very X-Men-centric villain, obviously, but Gambit is one of the X-Men. But although I'm really confused as to what's going on with the X-Men right now, because Bryan Singer has, and I talked about this yesterday with the TV deal, but Bryan Singer's been very vocal about the fact that Apocalypse is his final X-Men movie, and it's wrapping up all 6 films, and it's like, but you still have other movies going on. Like, is Gambit then not a part of this? And what about these new actors coming in? Like, the new Jean Grey and the new Jubilee and the new Cyclops? Are they done? So I just don't quite understand what's going on. So we'll see. We'll see how everything comes together. But that's the second story of the day, and I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think Bryan Cranston just played all of us? Or do you believe he genuinely wants to be a Marvel villain? And not just any Marvel villain, but Mr. Sinister. All right, so that's the second story of the day. And Rod, I'm sorry I didn't cover it right away, but I hope that scratched your Bryan Cranston as Mr. Sinister itch. All right, so the third story I told you was brought to me by a BTT viewer who tweets me regularly on Indian cinema. And he brought a very interesting headline to my attention, and that's that Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to co-star in a big Indian film. Now, this is interesting because in this, it's going to be the sequel to a film called Enthiran, which came out in 2010, the first one, and it's about a scientist who creates a robot, both played by the Bollywood star, please pardon my pronunciation here, Rajinikanth, and it was a big hit, all right? Before Bahubali, which, we recently discussed the trailer for that, hasn't come out here in the United States for me to be able to review yet. I missed it in theaters because I was traveling. I would like to review it, so hopefully it will be available on streaming or Blu-ray soon in the United States. But anyway, before Bahubali came along, Enthiran was the most expensive and the most successful South Indian film ever made. And India obviously is a very big place, and so they kind of divide their film industry into quadrants, right? Because there's not only different regions of the country, but different dialects, and even within India itself, films have to be dubbed for different languages, which is fascinating in and of itself. But anyway, this was a huge hit. So this guy, Rajinikanth, is 64 right now. You can see their pictures there. That's one heck of a toupee on that Indian actor, by the way. Like, he's totally bald, and he looks totally different, like, in real life. It took me, like, a little bit of time to reconcile, like, the actual photos of him outside of makeup and that photo, and that was the same person. I was like, are people mislabeling these photos? But a very impressive makeup team. Forget the cyborg stuff. And the size of that zipper, that's awesome. The zipper is so funny. He's a robot, but it looks like he has, like, doll clothes on because the zipper's so big. I think that's absolutely hilarious. But anyway, very big film. So it's funny that Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to be in the sequel. So this guy's 64, Arnold's 68. They're well matched. And Arnold's going to play another robot, and the rumor is he'll be the villainous robot in this sequel. And I think it's funny because the Terminator franchise has been put indefinitely on hold because of how much Genesis just totally bombed at the box office everywhere but China. Like, China, for some reason, was kind of into it. But they're not going to do anything more with it. But even though the Terminator franchise is indefinitely on hold, that's not going to stop Arnold from being a robot. He's just going to go do it in India. And I think it's interesting that, he's tried to have a career resurgence here in the U.S. didn't really work out, so now he's going to go to a different movie market and see if he can, get some success there. And that could be something that we see more and more of because there are really successful film industries now popping up all over the world. Hollywood isn't the only place that you need to work. You're seeing China start to work extensively with both fringe American actors and mainstream American actors. Like you had a movie with Adrian Brody and John Cusack come out with Jackie Chan, Dragon Blade, which is now available in the U.S. But then, of course, Matt Damon has The Great Wall coming out in 2016, which is a co-production between China and the United States. So China is definitely a place for Hollywood actors to go and get some additional work. You could see Russia start to do very well. And Mexico, of course, is very strong at the box office. But I don't know what the situation is that's so close to Hollywood, and a lot of Mexican talent just comes to Hollywood. So very interesting indeed. And I'm curious, for those of you who are fans of Bollywood cinema, what do you think of Arnold Schwarzenegger entering the fray? And also, if you're a fan of Enthiran, do you think Arnold is a good addition for the sequel? All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. And I have not so much a viewer question, but a viewer comment from Patrick J., who kind of wanted to correct me on something I said, so I wanted to respond to that because I feel I stand by what I initially said. So let me read you what Patrick said. So Patrick J. said, "Not really relevant to this video, but Grace, I think that you would like this info because I think you were calling out The Force Awakens for not having having diversity in front of the camera, but not behind it recently." And that's true, I did. And I think a number of us have. That, they're working very hard to have both ethnicity, gender, and age when it comes to diversity on the screen when it comes to the Star Wars movies, but behind the camera it's still, a lot of white guys. So Patrick J. pointed out that Kathleen Kennedy recently said, speaking at Fortune's Most Powerful Women Summit in Washington, that she revealed that 6 out of the 8 people involved in developing the film Star Wars 7 were women, and that 50% of her executive team is female. And so her quote is that Patrick added was, "Having a balance of men and women in the room changes the story." She said, "The dialogue, the point of view." Well, I think that's all well and good, and Patrick, thank you for bringing that to my attention, and I think it's interesting that clearly a lot of us are pointing out the lack of diversity behind the camera in the Star Wars films because Kathleen Kennedy feels the need to point this out. Was at a women's summit, and the thing to do there is to point out what you're doing to help other women in addition to your own success, so I understand that as well. But I'd like to point out that despite these women, being mentioned here, again, 6 of the 8, and 50% of her executive team, I never see any of them anywhere, do you? I don't see them at Star Wars Celebration events, I don't see them at D23, I don't see them at Comic-Con, and I don't see them in any of the press for the movies, right? Now, she said 6 out of the 8. I can tell you who the other 2 were because they're the only ones getting any press. Lawrence Kasdan and Simon Kinberg. Now, Lawrence Kasdan shouldn't get a lot of the press because he's Lawrence freaking Kasdan and he was involved in writing the original trilogies. Also, by the way, Indiana Jones. And Simon Kinberg, by the way, also deserves press. He is working like crazy right now. He's in charge of the X-Men films as well, also Fantastic Four. He's a really nice guy, and he's, really, I think, become the face for a lot of these franchises because he's consistent. I think he's very professional, and I think the studios feel comfortable sending him out as a spokesperson. And it's interesting to see a writer become so prominent with the media. That's unusual. But so I'm not criticizing those 2 individuals for getting attention. But if you have 6 other women working on the story, and they must have some writing credentials to get the gig, right? Why aren't they getting any attention as well? Why haven't there been any interviews with the writing team for Star Wars, right? I mean, they're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes press. That's a big, because they're not telling you what's in the movie, so they're focusing a lot on the nostalgia and the making of the movie. So in all these photo shoots they've done for Vanity Fair, etc., why don't they have a photo of people, from behind the scenes? That very famous black and white, circle for the first script read. I didn't see any women executives sitting there or any women writers. So I think that, and there's actually some very interesting coverage on this in the Hollywood Reporter, I think yesterday, about that diversity in Hollywood is only a thing in the media, and that you can only really work if you're not a white guy if you're willing to work cheap, because the studios and the TV production companies still aren't willing to pay you top dollar for your work. There's a lot of tokenism going on basically. And also I believe there was another article from someone working at Empire. I haven't read it yet. I just saw the headline. I'll put the links below in the video description to saying, Empire's a big hit, but I'm still pigeonholed in the kind of shows that I can work on as a black writer. So I think that's really, really interesting. And I think that the anonymity is, a big problem, and I think tokenism is horrible. And I think Kathleen Kennedy, even here, didn't say, these are the 6 women. And let me tell you their resumes and why we hired them. And 50% of my executive team is female, yet you don't see them going out anywhere, but we still focus on J.J. Abrams. He's the director, of course, but he's also producer, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's great those people are working on the film, but it would be also nice if they got a little bit of attention. And I think no matter who you are, I'm a big fan of credibility for everyone. And that's another thing that people are starting to talk about, writing credits for these big group franchise endeavors. For instance, Transformers has a team of writers putting everything together. You're getting more and more think tanks, and that's another wrinkle. How do you give the credit that's due to these people, even though they didn't technically write the screenplay itself? So very, very interesting. I think that they should call them like the writing team or the think tank for these franchises, and they should just credit them as such, in my opinion, and make sure they get the publicity that they need. All right, unless the movies are horrible, and then I'm sure they're like, I'm not in the Transformers think tank. What are you talking about? All right, so that's today's morning movie news. A lot of really interesting stuff going on. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Be sure to share them down below. So write your thoughts down below about the top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered on Monday, and any questions that you might have, or anything that you just want to discuss. It doesn't have to be a question per se, but as Rod and Patrick did here, and also I'm sorry I don't have that BTT viewer's name in front of me who tweets me about Bollywood, but please, I'm open to suggestions, and this show is something I want to discuss what you want to hear about. So always feel free to reach out to me on Twitter is the best way to do it, and in the comments for the first 24 hours on a video. All right, and don't forget to send those tweets out if you want to potentially win a copy of San Andreas on Blu-ray. All right, have a wonderful weekend. Bye.